Welcome to NTD Television's live coverage of the 2023 State of the Union Address, where President Joe Biden will address the nation in about an hour's time. Happy to be co-hosting tonight's production with our newest addition to the NTD family, veteran journalist and anchor Kelly Wright. Kelly, it's so wonderful to have you here tonight to produce this production.
Steve, it's a pleasure to join you and the NTD family, particularly at this juncture in our American history, where the President of the United States, of course, will be addressing the nation with his State of the Union address, his second one since he's come to office. The theme of tonight will be that the United States is unbowed and unbroken.
Kelly, we're so happy to have you, and we do have a distinguished panel that will be with us throughout the night to offer deep analysis of the president's speech, as well as the Republican rebuttal, which will be given by newly elected Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
And right now we want to get to that distinguished panel as we introduce to you the members of the panel tonight. Paris Denard is the former national spokesperson for the RNC, who also served in the White House. And Timothy Allen Simon is an attorney and owner of TAS Strategies based in San Francisco, California. He's a former California government official appointed by then California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. Gentlemen, it's good of both of you to join us this hour for this particular night, and you will be with us throughout the evening as the president addresses the United States, and also with the Republican response from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Timothy, I'll begin with you this hour. What can we expect to hear from President Joseph Biden tonight, and what is it that he must say to the American people, and what do you think is the current state of our union?
Well, to quote James Carville, it's the economy, stupid. So he's clearly going to have to address the economic challenges that the United States, and actually are global in terms of inflation. The recent jobs report, I'm sure, will be touted heavily. And also unification, to try to unify a divided government, to try to the best possible abilities, de-escalate culture wars and other issues that are clearly affecting our country that will particularly be coming out of the House of Representatives.
So Paris, let me ask you, you just heard what Timothy said about what he anticipates from the president tonight. But I want to ask you as well, just like I asked Timothy, what is the state of our union?
Well, thank you for having me on the program. The State of the Union depends upon whom you ask. If you are the majority of the Americans, the State of the Union is not strong. It's not working for them, whether it's crime or the economy or the just overall feeling of uncertainty because of international affairs, what we just saw with the Chinese spy balloon going over the country. There's a feeling of uneasiness that's happening across the country. So you'll hear the president try to talk about that the State of the Union is strong and that his accomplishments are plentiful. But does that translate to how the American people feel? And I don't think that it is, or that it does.
So we hear both of you talking about what this president will have to say tonight. I want to ask you both, and Paris, I'll start with you. What does the president have to do in order to achieve a bipartisan, common ground approach for the good of the American people?
Well, first, President Biden has to want to actually act in a bipartisan manner. He's in for a rude awakening right now because he no longer has Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in charge of the House of Representatives. There's a new sheriff, a new speaker in town, if you will, and that's Kevin McCarthy. And he has the podium, he has the mantle, and he is going to want to do things in a different manner. And President Biden is going to have to convince his Democrat caucus, especially the more progressive wing of the caucus, to actually want to work in a bipartisan manner to get things done. And there are things that can be done, but the question is, will Biden and the Democrats in Congress be willing to do it? I don't know if they will.
And Timothy, through your leadership role there in the state of California, you had the occasion to work and to get to know the current Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. What can you tell me based on McCarthy as you knew him back then, and the McCarthy of today as he's actually trying to reach out and bring his party together? He says he will be respectful of the President of the United States. He also adds that he will not do what then Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi did in tearing up President Trump's speech. What do you think will be taking place tonight between McCarthy as well as Mitch McConnell as well as the President of the United States?
Well, I think Speaker McCarthy will do everything he can to support his base. He will be the counter puncher. That's expected, as we will hear the remarks also from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. What he's in a real landmine now compared to his time in the California legislature and in politics and in the in the Bakersfield or Central Valley area. But he will, in my view, demonstrate leadership and trying to communicate to the Republicans that while we will make efforts for bipartisanship, I will not abandon the core principles of the party. President Biden is going to have the same challenge as he tries to shore up the left side of the aisle. So I bet Speaker McCarthy will rise to the occasion. His words are not designed to please many folks out there. He knows who he's speaking to, and that will be the base that he addresses.
Gentlemen, thank you.
It was a great precursor to kick off our coverage. We'll come back with our panel in just a moment. Right now, we have our congressional correspondent, Melina Wisecup, with us for a live update from the Capitol. Melina, what are you hearing from the Hill right now?
Hi, Steve. Hi, Kelly. Great to be with you guys. So as Kelly, you mentioned, one interesting note about what we've seen throughout the day here on Capitol Hill is that McCarthy did make it a point to say that he would not be tearing up President Biden's speech. Said that he said that he had been asked about this multiple times, so he wanted to clarify. Of course, we know that former Speaker Pelosi tore up President Trump's speech back in 2020. Now, about what we can expect to see. So to set the stage a little bit, this is President Biden's second State of the Union address, but his first address in a divided Congress with Republicans now in control of the House. And to that point, the White House says he will be outlining a 4-point unity plan. These are areas where he hopes both parties can come together and provide solutions for the American people, such as efforts to fight cancer and providing for veterans. And a newly emerging bipartisan topic is how to handle big tech. Specifically, Biden will address initiatives to help the youth come out of mental illnesses that are stemming from their indulging in social media. So these are some areas that we can expect to see received in a bipartisan way. But another area that Biden will surely address that will not be received with bipartisanship is how he speaks about the economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. He'll be touting some of what he sees as his accomplishments, such as passing the Inflation Reduction Act, for instance, or the infrastructure law. Now, we can expect to see this be received very well by Democrats, but not so much by Republicans. And we will be looking to see if there will be any theatrics play out. We know in past years, Congresswomen Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene sort of heckled Biden throughout his speech. And as a matter of fact, something we saw today on Capitol Hill is Congresswoman Greene carrying around a white helium balloon to sort of make a point about the way the Biden administration handled the Chinese spy balloon. So those are some key facts about what we're looking for tonight. Now, as for the guests that we'll see here in Congress, some Republicans have brought guests who have dealt with the border crisis firsthand. We spoke with Representative Michael Cloud earlier, who brought a sheriff from Texas along with him. Whereas Democrats, some of them are bringing victims of shootings, police shootings, school shootings, to sort of highlight what they see as a need for police reform and gun reform. And also notably, Speaker McCarthy will be having Enes Kanter Freedom, former NBA star, outspoken critic on China, as his guest, as a way to show this is a priority for him, to have both parties come together in a bipartisan way to address China and its human rights abuses. So this is what we're looking out for, and it's going to be an interesting night. Kelly and Steve?
Thank you.
Melina, thank you for the boots on the ground update. Let's bring back our panelists. I'd like to pose the next question to Paris Denard. Paris, I want to ask you about China. Melina mentioned it. China's obviously looming large in the background right now, likely not intended to be a major part of the president's speech, but one might call them an uninvited guest at this point after what has transpired. When it comes to foreign policy and how the United States is viewed on the world stage, has the delayed response in shooting down that CCP spy balloon impacted Biden's foreign policy?
Well, I think the main question is what is Joe Biden's foreign policy as president? It remains unclear. I, the lack of strength and fortitude and decisive action taken just past week with the Chinese Communist Party's spy balloon going over several states here in our country is unacceptable. And the lack of action shows weakness, and it tells our adversaries you can you can provoke the United States. They won't act swiftly. They may not act at all. And while he may not spend a lot of time talking about China, he ought to, because we have the issues of the coronavirus and China never being honest about that and how it impacted this country and the Congress specifically. And now the spy issue, it's something that he has to address, especially when it comes to pharmaceuticals and the economy. It's something that cannot be ignored, but I think it will be.
Paris, thank you for that. I want to go to Timothy Allen Simon right now. Timothy, as you know, the president will be touting some of his achievements. Now, we know the Republicans don't agree with his achievements, but as we heard from our reporter Melina Weisskopf, there is, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, there is the economy, and, of course, the 3.4% unemployment, the greatest it's ever been in 50 years, yet that is not resonating with the American people. So when it comes to this president's achievements, Timothy, what stands out the most, and what will he have to drive home in order to have a message that's strong enough to resonate with the American people, which the polls show they have not considered him to be the best choice for the presidency of the United States?
Well, I think he'll probably, and again, thank you, Kelly and Steve. I think he'll probably cite the event where he and Mitch McConnell were together in Kentucky to celebrate the repair and rebuilding of a major bridge and artery in the state of Kentucky, and how the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is benefiting all Americans, regardless of what party they belong to. I think that'll be a very important point there. I think he can also say regarding the CCP balloon, it's too bad we refer to it as a balloon because this is really a massive aircraft, but the delay in response will be, the position will be that they were trying to protect Americans from damage from the debris that could have been caused by shooting it down. So I think he'll try to say to the American people that I'm making rational, deliberative choices for the benefit of the country. This country is the leader of the free world. And I'm the one, as he moves into his campaign, as we're anticipating, I'm the one that has that calm, cool hand in the face of crises.
Timothy, you make a lot of good points there, and there's no question the president has had some successes, but does he run the risk of those successes being overshadowed by things like persisting inflation, the classified documents, and now, of course, as you mentioned, the Chinese aircraft flying over the United States?
Absolutely. He's going to have a focus on the kitchen table issues. Families are facing inflation, high interest rates. There has been promising economic indicators regarding what is expected to be the upcoming recession. But I would say that most American families, the hardworking families, are not really feeling it yet. We do have a job or a labor shortage in this country, but because of inflation, the dollars that American families are earning are not spreading as far as it should. So the president must show empathy, compassion, and awareness of this, saying that I know it's tough times, but brighter days are ahead, and give examples of why he can make these statements or representations.
Well, that's excellent commentary from both of you, Paris Denard and Timothy Allen Simon. Stay with us because you'll be with us throughout the entire evening tonight. Look, we're going to hear from our expert panelists, and indeed they're both very good, one and all, and contributing greatly to this State of the Union address. But we want to hear from the American people because we know that the American people are also, like Timothy pointed out, as well as Paris pointing out, kitchen table issues, money issues. They have their own thoughts and values and their own opinions of what this president has done. We went out on the streets to hear what they had to say. Watch this.
I think I was reading an article this weekend, like he put out an executive order to work on curbing some of the corporate profits, and some wages had gone up for workers, particularly in the African American and Latinx communities. So that was good news. I love the infrastructure bill, because maybe we'll have better trains someday. Better trains, better bridges. That'd be good.
Concealing his son's foreign dealings, receiving millions of dollars from people in China, concealing his son's millions of dollars paid by the Ukrainian companies, over which his son has absolutely no skill or talent. And it is a tragedy for America to see us being held hostage by Ukraine because they have more evidence on Biden's son that is forcing him to end up giving more weapons to a non-aligned country.
I would say it's climate change legislation.
I think the inflation. A lot of people tend to blame the president for that, even though he has very little control over that.
None that I know of. None. None. I can't think of anything. Yeah, everything that he's from the first day that he started, when he stopped the oil, the pipeline, and everything else. There was thousands of jobs were lost, and it just poor leadership and advisement. It's awful, just ruining the country.
So, Steve, therein lies a challenge for this president tonight, as we hear from the American people, hearing what they're saying. A dichotomy of opinion, if you will, a dichotomy of perspective. Some supporting the president and having a lot of knowledge about things like infrastructure and what it will do and what it will likely do for people throughout this country who want to see more rails, more bridges, more tunnels in places like Baltimore, New York City. And it's just amazing to see that and glean that from the American people. And then there are some who are saying, hey, he hasn't done anything at all. So he has a huge task ahead of him tonight. And now joining us with some perspective on the economy, live from the Capitol, where the State of the Union is set to get underway in just a few minutes. We have Virginia Congressman Bob Good. Congressman, I love your great state, the Commonwealth of Virginia. I used to live there myself. So from your perspective, right there in Hampton Roads, what is it? What is the state of the economy, and how does it help the people of the Commonwealth?
Well, it's certainly not helping the people of the Commonwealth, and 70% of Americans believe the country's on the wrong track, and a lot of that is because of the economy, whether it's the massive inflation that we haven't seen since the Jimmy Carter era, up some 13-14% over the last 2 years, costing the average American family some $7,000-8,000 a year just for the essentials. The increased cost in groceries, energy, housing, utilities that are robbing Americans of their purchasing power. And then how does the administration respond? They raise interest rates, or twice what they were when this president came into office. That's pricing Americans out of buying homes, buying cars, everything that's financed. So the economy is just very weak, and the president's trying to take credit for American resilience, where he can't quite hold back the economy in spite of his policies. And there's some Americans have added jobs, businesses and employers have added jobs, and the president, of course, had nothing to do with it. That was in spite of his policies.
Congressman, you're talking about a lot of pain out there, and people are feeling the pain. And when we think of American pain and the painful points such as our economy, you're mentioning eggs, there's gas, there's other things going on. Every household is scratching their head, what am I going to do about my retirement plan to get the kids to school? So there are some kitchen table issues. But let's talk about gas for a moment. As you know, that's been a biggie, and the gas is rising yet again. Do you think the president deserves credit for the lowering of the gas prices that we saw recently, albeit now there's an uptick going on?
Well, the president is responsible for gas prices being about 50% higher than they were when he took office. And that hurts fixed income folks, low income folks, senior citizens, college students, the middle class, more than just about anything else, what we pay a couple of times a week at the pump. But then it raises the cost of everything else. As you know, the president's war on American energy, his war on reliable, affordable energy in the name of his climate extremism, his environmental extremism, that causes the price of everything to go up, because not only are so many things made from from petroleum fuels, but everything, of course, is shipped by gas, by whether it's by air, by freight, or by truck, and that cost makes everything go up as well as the price of gas itself.
Congressman, we've got to go, but before we go, is there a way to achieve a bipartisan is there a way to achieve bipartisanship between Republicans and Democrats and this president for the common good of the American people?
I hope so. I hope that when it comes to negotiating this debt ceiling, the president will be responsible and reasonable in recognizing we can't keep this reckless spending that's caused the massive inflation, that's caused $32 trillion in national debt. And I hope when we Republicans send the Senate and send the president a bill that responsibly cuts our spending, puts us on a path to fiscal responsibility, that the president won't shut down the government. He'll join us in passing that.
Sir, thank you for joining us this hour.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
All right, so Timothy, we're bringing back our panel right now, Steve, and we want to bring in Timothy Allen Simon as well as Paris Denard.
Yeah, let's bring it back to Timothy right now. Timothy, you heard what the congressman had to say. Some economists say that a recession is inevitable if we're not already there. Will the economy ultimately help or hurt Democrats heading into 2024?
Well, if we're in a recession, it clearly will hurt them. I think the congressman was very accurate regarding President Biden's energy policy. We need energy independence in this country, reliability, and we need lower cost. And to the extent that there's this push for renewables and electrification, it has to be done in a way that benefits our economy and, again, the working people of this economy, not in a fashion that is appeasing the policy wonks in the area of climate change and global warming. So and that energy feeds everything, as the congressman said. So I do believe that, like President Obama, President Biden should have an all-the-above strategy, something that embraces our fossil fuel assets and decarbonizes those assets in a way to contribute to reducing the planet's climate. But it cannot be a hard shift to the unreliable renewable generation sources, because that increases cost and has enormous impact on grid reliability.
Paris, I want to go back to you. As you mentioned at the top of the program, when it comes to what is the state of our union, it ultimately depends on who you ask. We're seeing there's such a dichotomy depending on which party you support, but there is the old adage, you can torture the data until it speaks. What is the economy actually doing to the folks on Main Street?
Well, the congressman referred to a poll, and the poll was a CBS poll that showed 61% of the American people feel the economy is bad, and 76% are worried about inflation. So that is what's happening on Main Street. When you have the majority of Americans right now feeling that this economy under Joe Biden's presidency and under the majority of time was controlled by Democrats as bad. And when they're still worried about inflation, it makes the president's claims about this Inflation Reduction Act fall short, because he's going to get up there tonight and list all of his perceived accomplishments, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, when you have the majority of Americans still worried about inflation, still thinking the economy is not working for them. And so it's not enough to talk about what you think your record is. He's going to have to say what he's willing to do to fix this economy for every American, and how he's going to work with the Republicans to get it done. And it might mean having more conservative type of economic plans like we had with the previous administration. I don't know if he's willing to make those concessions, but the American people are speaking loud and clear that they're still worried about the economy. Like Timothy said, it's still the economy, stupid, is the phrase made famous by Carville, which is still applicable today.
Yeah, if I hear you both correctly, you're talking about there must be a balance that's set, a tone of balance. We can talk about the economy all throughout the night. We're going to hear the president talk about it. But gentlemen, I want to ask you both in the short time we have left with this discussion, To my Republican friends, this is from the President of the United States, what he will say tonight. If we could work together in the last Congress, there is no reason we can't work together in this new Congress. Here's what he says that's critical and will come out tonight. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. So he wants to get to a point of bringing people together to finish the job that he has for his own political agenda in terms of what he thinks is best for this country. But I got to ask you both. We've talked about the economy tonight. What about hope? Is there a way that this president and the 535 members there on Capitol Hill can break the ranks of political division, racial division, and bring some hope to America? Timothy?
Well, you know, there are many bills that come out of Congress every day that have partisan support. We often do not see them in the headlines, in the press, in the 24-hour news cycle. I do want to believe there's common ground, but you have to realistically look at, number one, you have the January 6th insurrection. To whatever extent certain members of Congress may be implicated there. You have the numerous Trump prosecutions, investigations, or proceedings. All of these, I think, are going to make Democrats say, is he above the law? What are you going to do, Merrick Garland? What are you going to do, Joe Biden? And Republicans saying, can we move on? You know, that event has already transpired. So I think it's going to be as much, again, the cultural wars and social issues and democracy issues as there will be the economic issues with the debt ceiling.
All right, Timothy and Paris, thank you.
And with that said, let's hit the streets again, where we ask the American people if they are feeling the pain of inflation.
Yeah, COVID started and it's just been getting progressively getting worse. I don't see any changes getting better. Until this administration leaves, I believe it's just going to get worse. I'm living out on my van right now. I lost my house. Now I'm living in a van.
One taco or one burrito used to be like $10. Now it's $17. This is what I just pay now.
It's a little worse.
As a mostly retired person, my expenses are not so great, so if I don't spend a lot of money, that inflation doesn't bother me as much.
We have 3 small children, and it's a struggle to keep food in the house, you know, and we're not struggling like almost on the streets, but just pinching pennies, the comfort that we used to have, it's not there.
Yeah, the gas prices now are starting to go back up. Groceries are high. Demand for, just normal stuff is gone through the roof. So it's making, people are pinching pennies a lot more.
Everything else has gone up, so it's been a little harder than last year. Just trying to make it day by day. Like every time I go to the grocery store, I feel like I'm spending more and more. So I've been trying to buy less. And it sucks because then I'm just trying to figure out what to do for the entire month.
We have to live paycheck to paycheck.
I mean, it's about the same, to be honest with you. It hasn't really changed.
And to another serious issue concerning Americans, the CCP's nefarious activity in its quest for global dominance. It's come to the forefront this past week, specifically with the Chinese spy balloon making its way across the continental United States. Joining us next, we're happy to have Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to join you. Yeah, good to be with you.
Congressman, the CCP launched this at a time just ahead of a high-stakes meeting with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Obviously, we have the State of the Union tonight. What do you think their intention was?
Weakness leads to aggression. We've seen this since January 20th of 2021, when President Biden decided that we were no longer going to be energy independent in America. You saw in August of 2021 the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, something we hadn't seen in America since Vietnam. They see weakness with the Biden administration, and they're exploiting it.
Congressman Tiffany, Senator John Kennedy joined Senator Marco Rubio of Florida introducing a bill to hold China accountable for lack of transparency and their mishandling of the coronavirus outbreak, which, by the way, has cost people around the world tens of thousands of lives, millions of jobs, and left untold economic destruction, which we're still feeling the effects of here in the United States. Has this issue been talked about enough And do you think that the president has any desire to hold China accountable?
So I certainly hope Congress does not leave this behind, what happened in that Wuhan lab, as more and more scientists say that this was something that may have escaped a laboratory, and I hope Congress will hold them accountable. I do not have high hopes for President Biden for whatever reason. He believes in appeasement with the communist Chinese, so it's going to be on Congress to follow through on this issue.
Congressman, you've recently introduced a resolution for the United States to basically resume normal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Tell us about that bill, and also how is Taiwan viewing what we've just witnessed over the past week?
Yeah, I have not spoken with Taiwanese officials here in the last week or seen any quotes from them, but what we're calling for is the end of the one China policy. And what's really interesting at this point is that there are a lot more congressional representatives that are signing on, especially here over the last few days when they see the communist Chinese, the mainland Chinese aggression that is going on around the world. When they see them going after America, it even raises awareness even more. But yeah, we're just calling for, let's recognize Taiwan. Taiwan is a democratic, free country that we should all be able to have diplomatic relations with, and America should never have to ask permission of another country to recognize a country like Taiwan.
Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us.
So as we've seen right there,
you, Steve.
Thank you, Congressman. Again, hearing from Congressman Tom Tiffany talking about what he sees going on in the Biden administration and how it pertains to moving America forward. He obviously is of the opinion that America is at a standstill right now. Something needs to be done. So tonight, as we've been mentioning, we will hear President Biden talk about his foreign policy, as we just saw the exchange there between my colleague Steve and the Congressman. And when it comes amid the China spy balloon shoot down off the coast of South Carolina, the president receiving widespread criticism, as we know, from Republican lawmakers to discuss the president's job performance on the world stage. We want to bring back now Timothy Allen Simon. Timothy, on the issue of foreign affairs, going even beyond, looking beyond the balloon, the spy balloon that was 3 buses wide. Do you think the president has the right approach as it pertains to foreign policy, keeping in mind that we heard the previous congressman talk about the fact that Afghanistan was a debacle with the way we withdrew. Let's talk about the president's foreign policy going back to that time period and looking forward.
Well, I remind the congressman and your viewers that the doors to China were opened by one Richard Milhous Nixon, the Republican president. And today we have an interesting relationship in that they're an adversary as well as a trading partner. Our explosion in solar energy largely came from the lower prices in photovoltaic cells that the Chinese, many say, dumped into the market. So, and then in the case of Afghanistan, I think both presidents have blood on their aprons, that being former President Trump as well as Biden. That was, in my view, set up for failure, and the Biden administration went along with it in terms of the abrupt departure. You cannot deny the fact that anytime you have people hanging on an airplane that's trying to take off, something went wrong in the process. And I think it had a lot to do with the transition of the Biden administration from the Trump administration, which was probably the roughest transition of administrations in recent American history. So I think the president does have to explain the relationship with China, the issues regarding the border. What is the Democratic immigration policy? Which is foreign policy, by the way. What is it? I think the Republicans are very clear. They want a wall. But Democrats, I believe, have to wave back and forth because of course, recognizing the human rights issues involved, the relationships with those our neighbors in Central and South America. So I think the president will need to articulate something that is tangible and digestible by the average working person who's probably not watching it, but be that as it may, he can articulate a message that the public can understand on how to deal with these quandaries that have developed over the last 2 years.
Timothy, you make a very valid point about the president's foreign policy and the quandary that we do face with regard to the Chinese Communist Party and the threat that it is trying to impose upon the United States. There's also Russia and Ukraine. There's also Nigeria. There's also Haiti. I mean, the list goes on. You can keep going on. And yet somewhere in the middle of it is China's involvement, or perhaps it's exploding it in terms of their public policy to come out against the United States. So what are your thoughts about the way this president has to handle moving forward the relationships that we have with China and with other adversaries that we have, including what's going on in Russia and Ukraine?
Yeah, I think he has to have a carrot and a stick. The carrot is the economic relationship that America has with China, and rather fortunate or unfortunately, the dependency that we have in areas like lithium, for example, which is critical, and cobalt, which are critical to battery storage, going back to the issue of energy. At the same time, he has leverage. We are the most powerful nation militarily and economically in the world, and he has to be able to demonstrate, by the way, to a country that is burnt out on war from Iraq and Afghanistan. So Republicans can talk really tough. Right now, we're in proxy conflicts with both China and Russia, but do we really want to send our daughters and sons back into combat? So there has to be a balance of drawing the line. And I do think, whether it was Obama in Crimea or Biden in Ukraine, you do have to draw the line, and there has to be clear consequences. Severe economic sanctions are affecting Putin's Russia. It is working to some degree, but we're still seeing the aggression. So he has a tough job, but I believe this is a president that knows what he's doing. The time that he spent in the United States Senate and the time he spent in the Obama administration, I do believe at the end of the day, he's a seasoned veteran. And, I voted for him amongst other reasons that he could possibly bring the two aisles together. He was known to partner with conservatives. In fact, Vice President Kamala Harris criticized him during the debates for that very reason. So it's my hopes that he can begin to send a message to say, we can differ, but we're still Americans. And the security and the economic well-being and the health of our populace is numero uno.
Timothy Allen Simon sharing his perspective in terms of what's going on with this president as well as Congress, the 535 members. Will we see bipartisanship coming out of tonight? We will follow it. Timothy, thank you. He'll be joining us throughout the evening. We really love hearing directly from you, the American people. After all, that's why we are here, talking about you and hearing from you. And we were curious to ask you what you think poses a bigger threat to the United States. Here's a look at what some of you are saying.
We are the one who poses the biggest threat to ourselves because, we need to take care of our country. We need to take care of our social problems in our country instead of sending money to other countries so they can fight their own, fights. So we need to take care of our country first.
For me personally, would be border security, just because I lost my 15-year-old son to a fentanyl poisoning, and just the amount of fentanyl that's coming into our country is just horrific.
A lot of people are unaware of what fentanyl is. It's a very deadly drug. It's probably the most lethal drug that's coming in through the southern border right now.
That it's going to be taken over by authoritarian fascists. The Electoral College and some other, the amount of money that is in politics, I think kind of corrupts the system a little bit.
I think it's China. China is taking a lot of. I'm originally from the Philippines, and they're taking the South China Sea. That's I'm concerned about. I think they're behind China right now, so which is not good. I live here in America.
Yeah, I would say it will be China, followed by Russia, and then Iran. Why? Because China is a mass producer of all the products in our country, and they own a lot of our properties here in the United States. A lot of people, I don't know if people know about that, but that's the truth.
I don't feel threatened as an American. I think we're in a strong country and in good shape.
People that
are in position of power don't understand or haven't understood the history in this country. You know, the so-called forefathers that put certain laws down and whatnot, that it's never been for certain people. And in order for you to change that, you got to pretty much rewrite the Constitution.
I think right now the state of the country needs some help, and we need to be unified as one instead of being against each other.
The situation at the southern border has been an ongoing debate at the center of our culture war here in the United States. Our congressional correspondent Melina Wisecup just moments ago caught up with California Congressman Luis Correa. Here's a listen.
I'm here with Congressman Lou Correa from California, and we're going to talk about immigration policy. Thank you, Congressman, for joining me.
Thank you for having me today.
Of course. So what do you think, from your take, how has the Biden administration handled immigration policy over the past 2 years?
Well, the best they can. As you know, under the Trump administration, it was really a zero policy situation where refugees from all over the world were really turned away just summarily, and that's where the Title 42 concept came up, which is because of COVID, nobody could get in. Under the Biden administration recently, there's been a change on how refugees specifically are handled. Last few months ago, you had the Ukrainian-Russia war break out. We actually had a Ukrainian refugee camp set up in Mexico, across the border, Tijuana, Mexico. And what happened was immediately the Biden administration waived Title 42 and gave them what's called parole status, which meant a temporary admission into the U.S. for a couple of years. And you saw the treatment of refugees night and day. Those refugees from Ukraine were processed in 24 to 48 hours, and they were permitted to come into the U.S. Today, there is no refugee camp, because today, Ukrainian refugees can fly directly from Europe to the U.S. automatically. That's the way you're supposed to handle refugees. Now the Biden administration is going to do it for other groups, including Haitians, Cubans, and a couple of other Latin American countries. But the point is, we have to have order when it comes to refugee processing. A lot of people around the world are very desperate. A lot of war-torn countries, a lot of violence. And traditionally, the United States has opened its arms to refugees, and that should be a tradition we continue to address.
Now, Congressman, I want to ask you about a letter that you signed along with 76 of your other Democrat colleagues to President Biden, urging him to do more on immigration policy, such as ending Title 42. If you could explain why you felt the need to join that letter and what you're asking of the president.
Absolutely. Title 42, as I mentioned, is a weapon, is a tool that was used to automatically turn back any refugees that came to the border. This is a health care issue. Healthcare is Title 42. Refugees are not a healthcare issue. It's a humanitarian issue. It's an immigration issue. So all we said was to the Biden administration, let's be honest and do this the right way. Title 42 has nothing to do with immigration. And I believe we're moving in that direction now. But remember, there's a lot of confusion here because we have a lot of issues that we talk about that we want to lump sum into the same package. We talk about refugees. We talk about undocumented. There's 12 million undocumented workers in the United States. Then we talk about drug addiction, mental health business. And then we talk about fentanyl and drug smuggling. All those are at least four different issues, and there's four different ways to address these four issues. We can't lump them into one issue and say the solution is one.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because in the judiciary hearing, this is a messaging, the judiciary hearing on the border this past week, we heard this messaging from Democrats multiple times that the issue of border security, the fentanyl smuggling and things like this should not be lumped in with immigration policy. Is this a strategy you think the White House should take moving forward with regards to immigration reform and border security?
To me, we've got to come up with a policy, a strategy that actually works. Think about mental health. Think about drug addiction. When I was growing up, drug of choice, heroin. Then it moved to cocaine. Then it was crack cocaine. Then it was horse tranquilizer. Then today is fentanyl, and I'm hearing there's something else coming along the line that people are beginning to use. What you have here is really playing a whack-a-mole game. you hit it here and it pops up over here. But the issue really here is mental health, drug addiction, and how do we address that? You can seal off the border, the southern border completely, which is what we've been doing for years and decades. It's not working. Drugs continue to flow into the country. Bottom line, drug addiction, yes, do everything we can to stop fentanyl from flowing into the country. But two separate issues, immigration, a different issue, refugees, another issue.
Now, I want to ask you about the bipartisanship when it comes to border security and immigration reform. Obviously, Republicans are disapproving of Biden's handling of the southern border, saying that border security should come first, many of them say. Many Democrats say that a pathway to citizenship or providing protections for DACA recipients should come first. I actually heard from a Republican congressman today that the two should work in parallel. That way both parties could get their priorities met while also addressing the issues. How do you see Congress moving forward in a bipartisan way on this?
I would welcome both measures moving parallel. I would love to see that. And let me explain to you why. Everybody has said border security first. We've been saying that for decades. Obama, Bush 1, Bush 2, Clinton, border security first. It's been 35 years, 36 now, since the last immigration reform. So when people say border security first, well, the amount of money we have spent on the border gone through the roof. Immigration reform, nothing. So if my colleagues say we want to do them both together, I'm interested in that deal. Because in my opinion, if that was the deal, we should have had immigration reform decades ago.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you. And like I said, today's a good day because we want to hear President Biden talk about his vision for America. And I think one of the important factors we got to keep in mind is immigration is not about immigrants. Immigration is about America. Immigration is about bringing in the brightest minds from around the world. The Einsteins that are out there wanting to come to America to keep us as the greatest country in the world. Immigration is about bringing in farm workers to harvest their food. Right now, 50% of all the farm workers are undocumented. So do you deport them? And then what happens to your food production? Horrific situation. But you don't want to give them legal status. Dreamers. We have dreamers in the military. We have dreamers that have died for this country. And we're still questioning what we should do. I hope whatever we do it based on the facts, not on political rhetoric, not on political spin. And I'm hoping President Biden tonight will address that issue.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Melina and the Congressman, thank you very much. We want to cut to a quick live shot right now as we prepare. We're going to bring our guest in as we show that. We see that they are preparing to come to order. Let's just listen in for a moment.
President of the United States into the chamber. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer. The gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Stefanik. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
So there's Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy as he's calling the members of Congress to order. And right now we want to talk about something that the president will be addressing tonight. We're going to keep an eye on this to make sure that we don't miss the president's entrance, of course. But the issue of police reform will be front and center tonight with the recent killing of Tyree Nichols in Memphis that was caught on camera. Here to assess what's going on and the fact that someone who has great knowledge and vision about what's going on in the policing community throughout the United States, all 18,000 police departments. I'd like to welcome Bobby Kipper, former police officer, 30-year veteran. Bobby, do you think the president will address the family of Tyree Nichols tonight since they will be there with First Lady Dr. Joe Biden?
Kelly, yes, I do. I'm sure he will acknowledge them being there, and of course he should. This is a very serious issue for not only that family, but a number of families in America. And I would imagine that he would start discussing, hopefully, what his platform is to try to move forward, deal with some of the issues. And there are issues in policing, but we can't throw it out yet. I mean, there are a lot of good things that happen every day in policing, but we also need to look at moving forward in a more professional manner.
Bobby, you are a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, writing about police matters, writing about gang mitigation. You have advised various governors of the Commonwealth of Virginia. You have also advised the Bush administration, Obama administration, and the Trump administration on better policing. Now, tonight, as we talked about the family, Rovon and Rodney Wells, who are the parents of Tyree Nichols, she stated in particular, this is a continuous fight. That, according to husband and wife, and as they said that at the memorial service, and they wanted to say that what they have to do is to fight for justice. As you know, a lot of people have been talking about now the George Floyd Justice and Policing Reform Act. As a former police officer and one who advises police departments throughout the country, what will that act do for reforming not just police departments and how they conduct their business, but also how will it help communities, in particular communities of color, which have been hard pressed because of certain things that have happened in the news where blacks and other people of color have died at the hands of police?
Kelly, there are a number of things I think in the Police Reform Act that stand out to me. We've always called for more relational training for policing in America. And I think part of the Reform Act was to provide the adequate funding for police departments across the country to really instill de-escalation programs and other programs that actually deal with citizen police contact, which I think is really the key issue. You know, all of this starts with behavior to begin with, but it also starts with a contact between police officers and citizens. And so I think that's really, really key. I also think it needs to be said that there has been a study by the Justice Department that there are millions of interactions yearly between police officers and citizens. And only about 2% of those millions of interactions end up in some use of force. So again, I think we need to reward and applaud policing across the board for a lot of the efforts they put forth in communities and the good police officers doing good work every single day that they go into the job, take the proper oath, and do what's right in the name of justice in America.
Bobby, I've seen you train police officers and talk to them about their purpose-driven lives, and you've stated categorically to the police that it's not about you, it's about us, meaning us, the American people, the police officers, and the community. I wanted to ask you, as we watched the president, not the president, but the people coming in from perhaps members of his cabinet, we'll continue to keep an eye on that as some members are filing in right now. But I've got to ask you about what you do in your role as the founder of the National Community Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. In that capacity, you came across a behavioral science component that you want to see police departments, police chiefs, and police officers and community leaders, faith-based leaders, as well as community leaders, start adopting. You call it actively caring for people. It's a behavioral science component that not too many people are talking about, except various police chiefs that have adopted your program. Tell me what that is and how it will help this country deal with the policing problem as well as deal with community violence.
Well, Kelly, as you well know, what we deal with are behavioral issues in communities. And I think the best way to really deal with those in a deeper way is to look at the role of behavioral science as it deals in training police officers. We do have an actively caring for policing model that really is building on the fact that citizens are rewarded for their good behavior in communities. And it's based on the concept that the best way to really reduce negative behavior in a community is to reward more positive behavior. So we believe that police officers can be ambassadors on both sides. We think that officers could reward citizens and start that great community policing connection by engaging in actively caring for people much more than they would having to enforce the law or getting involved in negative interactions. The police department is open 24/7. There's plenty of opportunities to make citizen connections in a proper way and to build those relationships in a positive way moving forward.
All right, Bobby, we've got to leave it there right now. We thank you for addressing the police matter. We will hear the president talk about it tonight. Bobby Kipper, who's the founder of the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence, as well as a Wall Street Journal Times best-selling author. And Steve, as we're watching right now the video of what's going on in Capitol Hill, we see the Supreme Court justices coming in. We are seeing over there the Joint Chiefs of Staff on the other side of that. You know, what happens for the State of the Union, it's not just pomp and circumstance. It is really a time for the leader of the free world. We see Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson coming in right there. But it is a time for the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, the leader of the free world, to address this nation and talk about the state of the Union. We can see that the members of Congress are standing by. And what's important about this, Steve, is that lawmakers are split in the gallery by party affiliation. The Republicans will be to the president's left and Democrats to the president's right. Senators from each party will get the front row seats, and House lawmakers will fill in the rows behind them. But Steve, what's important about this president is that he will open up by saying the story of America is a story of progress and resilience.
Yeah, Kelly, you bring up a lot of excellent points. And, you know, you mentioned Ketanji Brown Jackson likely to be in the president's speech because, you know, it's also a reflection of what he has accomplished in his first 2 years. And that's a big accomplishment to have a Supreme Court justice, Senate confirmed, and you know, in there. Right, so likely hear from him on that, and we're still seeing right now in the feed here members across the aisle reaching across, chatting. It's still going to be interesting to see some of the guests too. You mentioned the family of Tyree Nichols that will be joining the president. You also have, I think, U2 singer Sonny Bono, or excuse me, Bono. I'm sorry, Bono. You have Bono. You have the husband of Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker Pelosi, Paul Pelosi, who has recovered from his horrible injury.
Indeed, it was a horrible injury, and of course, we are seeing now the First Lady of the United States, Dr. Jill Biden, coming in, and they're greeting her and applauding her. She has numerous guests with her. You know, this is an important moment for her as well, as she brings people in that will illustrate the president's outreach to various communities. We heard through some of our wonderful people on the streets of America talking about issues. One of the issues that is really important for her is dealing with the scourge of fentanyl. That is something that should be important to every American. And we must say, give our condolences and prayers to the young lady that talked to us tonight, talking about Kevin McCarthy speaking now. Let's listen in.
The President's Cabinet.
All right, we are seeing the introduction of the President's Cabinet right now, and Steve, again, as the Secretary of State Antony Blinken coming in there, shaking the hands of Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. We see Janet Yellen right there coming in. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. One thing to point out about Secretary of State Antony Blinken is that he was scheduled to go to China. This week, he was supposed to be there until that 3 buses wide balloon appeared in the sky and traversed this country and became the subject matter of so many people. He canceled that trip. We're listening right now, waiting for the Sergeant of Arms to come in and announce the president. And the president will come in. He will walk up to where we see Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy, as well as the Vice President Kamala Harris. And this is the first time the president will be speaking to a divided Congress.
Kelly, you bring up a really good point. China seems to have barged their way into the State of the Union in some form or another. Earlier today, Secretary Lloyd Austin trying to have a discussion with Chinese officials and them not returning his call. That's also making news. You also have Democrats and Republicans, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, saying that, you know, we don't want to escalate this, but we need to address things not kinetically, but there's certain things that we can do to call out China more, to raise our voices, whether that be their posturing against Taiwan and their human rights violations. China's one of the most atrocious human rights violators in the world, and some say that that's actually their Achilles heel. And that's one way that you can actually defeat the CCP without firing a single shot, which is exposing them and letting world governments, world people know exactly what this regime is all about.
You know, it is hard to keep people who love freedom down. Even when they go through persecution and duress, which is what's happening in the communist China. And we have to understand that the people who are going through that are living to tell their story. And when they tell their story, they will look to America as being a beacon of hope. And that is something America must never fail in being. So we will hear from this president, but the resolve of the American people should be one that we stand in lockstep, in agreement with those who are being persecuted, to always keep our arms reached out and stretched out wide to help them in any way that we can. And certainly this president has to begin to understand that China is a problem, Russia's a problem, and to our adversaries, he must be able to get a geopolitical foreign policy that's intact, that is rooted and grounded in a bipartisan support, and has the vigor and rigor to actually call out wrong where we see it, whether it's the Communist Party of China or other countries that would rear their ugly head of terrorism or anything to that liking.
Indeed, Kelly. And you know, a lot of people sometimes will refer to the State of the Union speech as the president's report card. I look at it more as a progress report, because the real report card, in my opinion, is when the American people make their way to the election booth and vote. And so we just saw what happened in the midterms. Some say that the red wave didn't come, but yet nonetheless you do have a majority in the House of Representatives. You do have a different Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, there standing next to Vice President Kamala Harris. This is actually the first time in some years that you do have a Republican Speaker. And it's going to be interesting to see how the new Speaker handles himself throughout the speech tonight.
And look, the politics of all of this, as it relates to the American economy, as it relates to our public policy, as it relates to our foreign policy, it all comes down to what this president will have to say, because he's putting his future on the line as well as he addresses the American people. Steve, as you know, he is contemplating running for office again. If he should run, he has to be successful in order to win. Many people are saying they do not want him to run because he is a man that is now 80 years of age. So in 2024, should he be reelected, he would be he's already the oldest serving president, but he would be 82 years of age at that point in time. So tonight he will have to show the American people that he has the confidence and that he has the vigor, the energy, and the capacity to serve. His critics have said that he is losing his step, and some will argue that he's already lost his step. That is something that his Republican critics have really used against him. So he has a lot on the plate tonight.
And as we saw, Kelly, earlier when the White House released some of the excerpts of what he will be talking about tonight, obviously our guests have mentioned it. The president's going to be talking a lot about his successes in the economy. And although on paper there are some successes, you mentioned it earlier, there's a series of polls out there that show that the American people aren't necessarily feeling the effects of his policy. Egg price, the cost of eggs, the cost of gas. The American people are still feeling the pinch.
It's those pocketbook issues that will likely be front and center, not only tonight, but throughout any type of campaign that he runs for re-election. His adversaries or his opponents will definitely drill down on that. It will be something that will weaken the president if the economy cannot turn around and bring those pocketbook issues to bear. The president again tonight will not only talk about the economy, he'll talk about bipartisan support. As I mentioned, he's going to say tonight, I'm quoting him here, fighting for the sake of fighting. And look, I know why he's saying that. He knows that the American people are tired of the political frustration. Let's listen in now. The gavel's just been hit by Speaker of the House,
Mr. Speaker,
Kevin McCarthy.
the President of the United States.
That announcement coming from the Sergeant of Arms. Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States, and there is President Joseph Robinette Biden. He campaigned on healing the soul of America. This will be his second address for the State of the Union to the American people since becoming president. This is something he has long wanted to do. When he was campaigning, he talked about his humble upbringings in Scranton, Pennsylvania. There you see, she's always in these pictures, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Behind the president is the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who, by the way, and then behind him is the Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries.
Just one quick thing to know for our viewers, if you're watching the screen right now, behind President Biden, that group of folks are all of the Republican House members. The folks he's interacting with now on that side, as he turns over to the Republicans, he turns back there to the Democrats. So he does have the option to shake hands with both sides. So it'll be interesting to see who he reaches out to as he makes his way to the podium.
As you're speaking, I see Mike McCall coming up to him.
Yep.
Let's see if the cameras stay with it. The president reaching out to the Democrat side, the side that support him, but yet some Democrats are concerned about if he can win a re-election. Look, this president has a lot to say tonight. The American people want to know what's going on. Will he be able to do it? Of course, that's a great picture right there. The Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, and Vice President Kamala Harris, both Californians, I might add. So they've had dealings with each other in the past when she served in that state as an attorney general and as a prosecutor. So it's not like they don't know each other. There he is reaching out to the other side.
And it's nice to see the Speaker of the House maintaining decorum and still showing respect to the office and standing and clapping for the president as he walks in.
We see Senator Kyrsten Sinema there, who has left the Democrat Party to become independent.
And just to touch upon it again, as the president makes his way down to give the 2023 State of the Union address, members in attendance will be obviously members of Congress, senators, congressmen and women. You also have Supreme Court justices, cabinet members, a variety of folks that were invited guests. And
you mentioned earlier Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, and we just saw Ben Cardin there greeting the president. Look, this is something that Joe Biden likes. He likes being there in the House, in the Senate. He served there for decades. He knows the people. He also says that he knows foreign policy because he's spoken to all the world leaders. He's looked into their eyes and he knows what they're all about. Let's see what he says tonight, though, about Xi, about the Communist Party of China, and what he says about Russia and Ukraine. He has a lot on his plate.
On the issue of foreign policy, Kelly, one interesting note here. House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCall, you just mentioned him there, he's also opening an investigation into Biden's withdrawal of Afghanistan. His invited guest tonight is Roya Rahmani. She was the country's first female ambassador to the United States.
Very good to point that out. The Afghanistan situation, the way that unfolded, was something that many Americans just cannot forget. And there are many Afghanistan refugees who have made it here to the United States, and they're still grappling with the fact that some of their loved ones are still in harm's way. There again, we see the First Lady of the United States, along with the Second Gentleman of the United States. The President is approaching the dais. He's going to shake the hand, of course, his Vice President Kamala Harris and Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House. Let's listen in.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress, by the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think you. Only this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader. You're the majority leader. About that much bigger? Yeah. Well, I tell you what. I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threat since the Civil War, and today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, we're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I say I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together. came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. You came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it's important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think folks, you all are as informed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not no one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs move overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. Along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. He really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. A near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital, and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything, from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight. They were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips, each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up, people got laid off. So did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres, literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factors. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs. Because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. And it's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses. So much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be #1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back because we came together and passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And I mean this sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. I went there last month with Democrats and Republicans and from both states to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. The folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America, 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which many thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We're going to buy American. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards that require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why, I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back. Because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer or your child gets deadly ill or something happens to you. What are you going to have? You get money to pay for those medical bills? Or are you going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it? I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, We're taking on powerful interests to bring healthcare costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It cost the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Packaging it all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed a law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. People are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes who need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Folks, the Big Pharma is still going to do very well, I promise you all. I promise you they're going to do very well. This law also caps, and won't even go into effect until 2025, costs, out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors on Medicare at a maximum of $2,000 a year. You don't have to pay more than $2,000 a year, no matter how much your drug costs are. Because you know why? You all know it. Many of you, like many in my family, have cancer. You know the drugs can range from $10,000, $11,000, $14,000, $15,000 for the cancer drugs. If drug prices rise faster than inflation, drug companies are going to have to pay Medicare back the difference. We're finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Bringing down prescription drug costs doesn't just save seniors money, it cuts the federal deficit by billions of dollars, by hundreds of billions of dollars. Because these prescription drugs are drugs purchased by Medicare to keep their commitment to the seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach, that's okay, that's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year. Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of prescription drugs, I will veto it. Look, I'm pleased to say that more Americans have health insurance now than ever in history. A record 16 million people are enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And thanks to the law I signed last year, saving millions are saving $800 a year on their premiums. And by the way, that law was written and the benefit expires in 2025. So my plea to some of you, at least in this audience, let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. Expand coverage of Medicaid. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. Lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited the devastating aftermath of record floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires from Arizona to Mexico to all the way up to the Canadian border. More timber has been burned, as I've observed from helicopters, than the entire state of Missouri. And we don't have global warming? Not a problem. In addition to emergency recovery, from Puerto Rico to Florida to Idaho, we're rebuilding for the long term. New electric grids that are able to weather major storms and not prevent those forest fires. Roads and water systems withstand the next big flood. Clean energy to cut pollution and create jobs in communities often left behind. We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat. We have an obligation, not to ourselves, but to our children and grandchildren to confront it. I'm proud of how America at last is stepping up to the challenge. We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. And we pay for these investments in our future by finally making the wealthiest and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share. Just begin. Look, I'm a capitalist. But pay your fair share. I think a lot of you at home agree with me and many people that you know. The tax system is not fair. It is not fair. Look, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. God love them. 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. And let me be crystal clear. I said at the very beginning, under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do. We have to reward work, not just wealth. Pass my proposal for the billionaire minimum tax. You know, there's 1,000 billionaires in America. It's up from about 600 in the beginning of the term. But no billionaire should be paying a lower tax rate than a school teacher or a firefighter. I mean it. Think about it. I mean, look. I know you aren't enthusiastic about that, but think about it. Think about it. Have you noticed Big Oil just reported its profits? Record profits. Last year they made $200 billion in the midst of a global energy crisis. I think it's outrageous. Why? They invested too little of that profit to increase domestic production And when I talk to a couple of them, they say, we're afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells and all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade, and that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it. Production. If they had, in fact, invested in the production to keep gas prices down, instead, they used the record profits to buy back their own stock, rewarding their CEOs and shareholders. Corporations ought to do the right thing. That's why I propose we quadruple the tax on corporate stock buybacks and encourage long-term investments. They'll still make considerable profit. Let's finish the job and close the loopholes that allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Instead of cutting the number of audits for wealthy taxpayers, I just signed a law to reduce the deficit by $114 billion by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. That's being fiscally responsible. In the last 2 years, my administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster in the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, so folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be spent. All right. I'm ready. We got unanimity. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for millions of seniors. Americans have to pay into them from the very first paycheck they started. So tonight, let's all agree, and we apparently are, let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We'll not cut Social Security. We will not cut Medicare. Those benefits belong to the American people. They earned it. And if anyone tries to cut Social Security, which apparently no one's going to do, and if anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to take away be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, but apparently it's not going to be a problem. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it. Let's sit down together and discuss our mutual plans together. Let's do that. I can tell you, the plan I'm going to show you is going to cut the deficit by another $2 trillion. And it won't cut a single bit of Medicare or Social Security. In fact, we're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about tonight, by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share. Look. Here's the deal. They aren't just taking advantage of the tax code. They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars because they can finally get a hearing aid over the counter without a prescription. Look, capitalism without competition is not capitalism. It's extortion. It's exploitation. Last year, I cracked down with the help of many of you on foreign shipping companies that were making you pay higher prices for every good coming into the country. I signed a bipartisan bill that cut shipping costs by 90%, helping American farmers, businessmen, and consumers. Let's finish the job. Pass the bipartisan legislation to strengthen antitrust enforcement and prevent big online platforms from giving their own products an unfair advantage. My administration is also taking on junk fees, those hidden surcharges too many companies use to make you pay more. For example, we're making airlines show you the full ticket price up front, refund your money if your flight is canceled or delayed. We've reduced exorbitant bank overdrafts by saving consumers more than $1 billion a year. We're cutting credit card late fees by 75%, from $30 to $8. Look, junk fees may not matter to the very wealthy, but they matter to most other folks in homes like the one I grew up in, like many of you did. They add up to hundreds of dollars a month. They make it harder for you to pay your bills or afford that family trip. I know how unfair it feels when a company overcharges you and gets away with it. Not anymore. We've written a bill to stop it all. It's called the Junk Fee Prevention Act. We're going to ban surprise resort fees that hotels charge on your bill. Those fees can cost you up to $90 a night at hotels that aren't even resorts. The idea that cable, internet, and cell phone companies can charge you $200 or more if you decide to switch to another provider. Give me a break. We can stop service fees on tickets to concerts and sporting events and make companies disclose all the fees up front. And we'll prohibit airlines from charging $50 round trip for a family just to be able to sit together. Baggage fees are bad enough. Airlines can't treat your child like a piece of baggage. Americans are tired of being. We're tired of being played for suckers. So pass the Junk Fee Prevention Act so companies stop ripping us off. For too long, workers have been getting stiffed, but not anymore. We're beginning to restore the dignity of work. For example, I should have known this, but I didn't until 2 years ago. 30 million workers have to sign non-compete agreements for the jobs they take. 30 million. So a cashier at a burger place can't walk across town and take the same job at another burger place and make a few bucks more. It just changed. But they just changed it because we exposed it. That was part of the deal, guys. Look it up. But not anymore. We're banning those agreements so companies have to compete for workers and pay them what they're worth. And I must tell you, this is bound to get a response from my friends on my left but the right. I'm so sick and tired of companies breaking the law by preventing workers from organizing. Pass the PRO Act, because business have a right, workers have a right to form a union. And let's guarantee all workers have a living wage. Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care. That's going to enable millions of more people to go and stay at work. And let's restore the full child tax credit, which gave tens of millions of parents some breathing room and cut child poverty in half to the lowest level in history. And by the way, when we do all these things, we increase productivity, we increase economic growth. So let's finish the job and get more families access to affordable, quality housing. Let's get seniors who want to stay in their homes the care they need to do so. Let's give more breathing room to millions of family caregivers looking after their loved ones. Pass my plan so we get seniors and people with disabilities the home care and services they need. And support the workers who are doing God's work. These plans are fully paid for and we can afford to do them. Restoring the dignity of work means making education an affordable ticket. Jill, my wife, who teaches full-time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Any nation that out-educates is going to out-compete us. Folks, we all know 12 years of education is not enough to win the economic competition of the 21st century. If we want to have the best educated workforce, let's finish the job by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. Studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school and go on to earn a 2 or 4 year degree, no matter their background they came from. Let's give public school teachers a raise. We're making progress by reducing student debt, increasing Pell Grants for working and middle-class families. Let's finish the job and connect students to career opportunities starting in high school. Provide access to 2 years of community college, the best career training in America, in addition to being a pathway to a 4-year degree. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And folks, in the midst of the COVID crisis, when schools were closed and we were shutting down everything, let's recognize how far we came in the fight against the pandemic itself. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of the American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we've broken the COVID grip on us. COVID deaths are down by 90%. We've saved millions of lives and opened up our country. We opened our country back up, and soon we'll end the public health emergency. But that's called a public health emergency. But we'll remember the toll and pain that's never going to go away. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID. 1 million. Families grieving, children orphaned. Empty chairs at the dining room table constantly reminding you that she used to sit there. Remembering them, we remain vigilant. We still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts and keep America safe. And as we emerge from this crisis stronger, we're also got to double down on prosecuting criminals who stole relief money meant to keep workers and small businesses. afloat. Before I came to office, you remember, during that campaign, the big issue was about inspector generals who would protect taxpayers' dollars who were sidelined. They were fired. Many people said we don't need them. And fraud became rampant. Last year, I told you the watchdogs are back. Since then, we've recovered billions of taxpayers' dollars. Now let's triple the anti-fraud strike force going after these criminals, double the statute of limitations on these crimes, and crack down on identity fraud by criminal syndicates stealing billions of dollars from the American people. And the data shows that for every dollar we put into fighting fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all people are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is violated. Joining us tonight are the parents of Tyree Nichols. Welcome. We had to bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, or playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children, I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. With the faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this. Imagine how much courage and care that takes. It's up to us, to all of us. We all want the same thing. Neighborhoods free of violence. Law enforcement who earns the community's trust. Just as every cop, when they pin on that badge in the morning, has a right to be able to go home at night, so does everybody else out there. Our children have a right to come home safely. Equal protection under the law is a covenant we have with each other in America. We know police officers put their lives on the line every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. In one sense, we ask much too much of them. I know most cops and their families are good, decent, honorable people, the vast majority. But they risk their lives every time they put that shield on. But what happened to Tyree in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. Help them succeed in keeping us safe. We also need more first responders and professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges. More resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime. More community intervention programs. More investment in housing, education, and job training. All this can help prevent violence in the first place. And when police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. With the support of the families of victims, civil rights groups, and law enforcement, I signed an executive order for all federal officers banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants, and other key elements of the George Floyd Act. Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good. And all of us, folks, it's difficult, but it's simple. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts that we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform. Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others. But we know our work is not done. Joining us tonight is Brandon Say, a 26-year-old hero. Brandon put his college dreams on hold to be at his mom's side when she was dying from cancer. And Brandon now works at a dance studio started by his grandparents. And 2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, he heard the studio door close, and he saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestled a semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all. I led the fight to do that in 1994. In 10 years, that ban was law and mass shootings went down. After we let it expire in the Republican administration, mass shootings tripled. Let's finish the job and ban these assault weapons. And let's also come together on immigration. Make it a bipartisan issue once again. We now have a record number of personnel working to secure the border, arresting 8,000 human smugglers, seizing over 23,000 pounds of fentanyl in just the last several months. We've launched a new border plan last month. Unlawful migration from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela has come down 97% as a consequence of that. But American border problems won't be fixed until Congress acts. If we don't pass my comprehensive immigration reform, at least pass my plan to provide the equipment and officers to secure the border. And a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those on temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Here in the People's House, it's our duty to protect all the people's rights and freedoms. Congress must restore the right and the Congress must restore the right that was taken away in Roe v. Wade and protect Roe v. Wade. Give every woman a consular right. The Vice President and I are doing everything to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient safety. Well, already more than a dozen states are enforcing extreme abortion bans. Make no mistake about it. If Congress passes a national ban, I will veto it. But let's also pass the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity. Our strength is not just the example of our power, but the power of our example. Let's remember the world's watching. I spoke in this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. A murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Would we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did. And together, we did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukrainian's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, united. We're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you as long as it takes. Our nation is working for more freedom, more dignity, more peace, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made clear in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger. Investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominating. Investing in our alliances and working with our allies to protect advanced technologies so they will not be used against us. Modernizing our military to safeguard stability and deter aggression. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world. And I'm committed. I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world, but make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracies have grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one. America's rallying the world to meet those challenges, from climate to global health, to food insecurity, to terrorism, to territorial aggression. Allies are stepping up, spending more, and doing more. Look, the bridges we're forming between partners in the Pacific and those in the Atlantic, and those who bet against America are learning how wrong they are. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. Never. Well, when I came to office, most assured that bipartisanship assumed was impossible, but never believed it. That's why a year ago I offered a unity agenda to the nation as I stood here. We made real progress together. We passed a law making it easy for doctors to prescribe effective treatments for opioid addiction. We passed the gun safety law, making historic investments in mental health. We launched the ARPA-H drive for breakthrough in the fights against cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and so much more. We passed the Heath Robinson PACT Act, named after the late Iraq War veteran whose story about exposure to toxic burn kits I shared here last year. I understand something about those burn pits, but there's so much more to do. We can do it together. Joining us tonight is a father named Doug from Newton, New Hampshire. He wrote Jill, my wife, a letter, and me as well, about his courageous daughter, Courtney. A contagious laugh, his sister's best friend, her sister's best friend. He shared a story all too familiar to millions of Americans and many of you in the audience. Courtney discovered pills in high school. It spiraled into addiction and eventually death from a fentanyl overdose. She was just 20 years old. Describing the last 8 years without her, Doug said, "There's no worse pain." Yet their family has turned pain to purpose, working to end the stigma and change laws. He told us he wants to start a journey toward American recovery. Doug, we're with you. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. Big, you got it. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking, with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border. Working with couriers like FedEx to inspect more packages for drugs. Strong penalties to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. Second, let's do more on mental health, especially for our children. When millions of young people are struggling with bullying, violence, trauma, we owe them greater access to mental health care at their schools. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online. Ban targeted advertising to children and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Third, let's do more to keep this nation's one truly sacred obligation to equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home. Job training, job placement for veterans and their spouses as they come to return to civilian life. Helping veterans afford the rent, because no one should be homeless in America, especially someone who served the country. Dennis McDonough is here, of the VA. We had a first real discussion when I asked him to take the job. I'm glad he did. We were losing up to 25 veterans a day on suicide. Now we're losing 17 a day to the silent scourge of suicide. 17 veterans a day are committing suicide. More than all the people being killed in the wars. Folks, VA is doing everything it can, including expanding mental health screening, proven programs that recruits veterans to help other veterans understand what they're going through, get them the help they need. We got to do more. And fourth, last year, Jill and I reignited the cancer moonshot that I was able to start with President Obama asked me to lead our administration on this issue. Our goal is to cut the cancer death rates at least by 50% in the next 25 years. Turn more cancers from death sentences to treatable diseases. Provide more support for patients and their families. It's personal to so many of us in this audience. Joining us are Morris and Candice, an Irishman and the daughter of immigrants from Panama. They met and fell in love in New York City and got married in the same chapel Jill and I got married in New York City. Kindred spirits. He wrote us a letter about his little daughter, Ava, and I saw her just before I came over. She was just a year old when she was diagnosed with rare kidney disease, cancer. After 26 blood transfusions, 11 rounds of radiation, 8 rounds of chemo, 1 kidney removed, giving a 5% survival rate. He wrote how in the darkest moments he thought, if she goes, I can't stay. Many of you have been through that as well. Jill and I understand that like so many of you. And he read Jill's book describing our family's cancer journey and how we tried to steal moments of joy where we could with Bo. For them, that glimmer of joy was the half smile of their baby girl. It meant everything to them. They never gave up hope. Little Ava never gave up hope. She turns 4 next month. They just found out Ava's beating the odds, is on her way to being cured of cancer. And she's watching from the White House tonight and she's not asleep already. For the lives we can save. For the lives we can save and the lives we've lost, let this be a truly American moment that rallies the country and the world together and proves that we can still do big things. 20 years ago, under the leadership of President Bush and countless advocates and champions, he undertook a bipartisan effort through PEPFAR to transform the global fight against HIV/AIDS. It's been a huge success. He thought big, he thought large, he moved. I believe we can do the same thing with cancer. Let's end cancer as we know it. Cure some cancers once and for all. Folks, there's one reason why we've been able to do all of these things. Our democracy itself. It's the most fundamental thing of all. With democracy, everything's possible. Without it, nothing is. For the last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie assailed and unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th. Here tonight in this chamber is a man who bears the scars of that brutal attack, but is as tough and as strong and as resilient as they get. My friend Paul Pelosi. Paul, stand up. But such a heinous act should have never happened. We must all speak out. There's no place for political violence in America. We have to protect the right to vote, not suppress the fundamental right. Honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We have to uphold the rule of law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment where they have been called to protect our democracy, defend it, stand up for it. And this is our moment. My fellow Americans, we meet tonight at an inflection point, one of those moments that only a few generations ever face, where the direction we now take is going to decide the course of this nation for decades to come. We're not bystanders of history. We're not powerless before the forces that confront us. It's within our power of we, the people. We're facing the test of our time. We have to be the nation we've always been at our best, optimistic, hopeful, forward-looking. A nation that embraces light over dark, hope over fear, unity over division, stability over chaos. We have to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We're good people. The only nation in the world built on an idea, the only one. Other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity, but we're the only nation based on an idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God. A nation that stands as a beacon to the world. A nation in a new age of possibilities. So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. Because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong. I'm not new to this place. I stand here tonight having served as long as about any one of you have ever served here. But I've never been more optimistic about our future, about the future of America. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
And so there we have it, the President of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden, giving his second State of the Union address, concluding with the matter saying that the soul of America is strong, the backbone of America is strong, the people of America is strong, and went on to say because of that, the State of the Union is strong. Just some, Steve, some quick thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see mixed reactions. He obviously made an attempt right off the bat to reach out to Kevin McCarthy, the speaker that you see on the screen right there, and congratulate him on, winning his speakership there. But at the same time, I couldn't help but notice a lot of heckling in the crowd and a lot of passion. I couldn't quite make out what the topics were that had people riled up on the Republican side, but one that did stand out was when President Biden mentioned the fentanyl crisis, and I did see that people said close the border. Yeah.
And they kind of played into, or he kind of played into that by responding that, yes, we must focus on the border and stop fentanyl in its tracks and stop the fact that so many Americans are dying because of fentanyl. It's really striking when you see this president, as we watch him speaking with members of the House there as he prepares to leave the Capitol and leave the House chamber. But again, to your point, there was some heckling tonight from the Republican side. There were also some moments of joint applause, albeit the Republicans were pretty much quiet throughout the evening. We saw House Speaker Kevin McCarthy applaud him on trying to, when the president talked about finding a consensus and some bipartisanship to deal with the economy or the economic woes in this country and finding a solution to the debt ceiling.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of struck me was, when the camera panned to the members in the audience there, you had former Speaker Nancy Pelosi amongst the ranks of the rank and file, if you will. No longer the Speaker, obviously, and no longer holding a leadership position even in the Democratic Party. You saw President Biden go out of his way to congratulate the first African-American Democratic leader, Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah. I want to point out a couple of things the president also talked about that were somewhat noteworthy as well. The president talked about unity, reaching out to have a unity agenda. He reached out across the aisle, and when he heard some of the blowback from Republicans there, he actually listened to them and actually try to answer them right there. It was very interesting to see how the president was. The president was also upbeat, and many people had been looking to see if he would be upbeat or if he would look tired and old, but he seemed to be energetic, having a few problems with the teleprompter, but even we have problems with the teleprompter, but the president communicating his speech and his take on his agenda and touting his accomplishments and achievements. And at the same time, when we hear from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders of Arkansas, she will deliver the Republican address to the nation, and we'll hear what the Republicans have to say, in large part officially, about this president and about moving forward. And the question is, it keeps coming back to, how does America find itself gripped with the economy that we have, and also facing the fact that historically this president has been able to create a 3.4% unemployment rate, 10 million jobs. And so the question is, was he able to resonate with the American people?
And to your point, newly elected Arkansas Governor Sarah Sanders Huckabee will be giving the Republican response to President Joe Biden's State of the Union. But before that, let's go back to the Capitol right now, where our congressional correspondent Melina Wisecup is there. Melina, if you could, paint the picture for us. What's your take on the scene there?
Yeah, Stephen Kelly, so much like you both pointed out, the president was quite energetic, especially starting his speech and even throughout his speech. And like you all mentioned, there was a couple of moments of heckling and some things I want to mention about where these moments occurred. So this State of the Union address comes at a time when one of the most pressing issues for President Biden is having to work across the aisle and work with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy on raising that debt ceiling. So when Biden tried to once again accuse Republicans, which has been a messaging strategy from Democrats, accuse Republicans of trying to cut programs like Social Security and Medicare in exchange for raising the debt ceiling, you heard a lot of commotion from the Republican side, because this is something that Speaker McCarthy, as well as many Republicans that we've spoken to, have said that is off the table. And they're not willing to cut these programs. So once Biden did notice, like you mentioned, Kelly, he responded. Once Biden did notice that Republicans were sort of calling him out on this, he did respond to those Republicans, kind of calling on them to stand up and show the American people where they stand on the issue. And then at that point, you did see Republicans stand up with Democrats and cheer together. Another moment that was interesting where Republicans stood up and applauded was when Biden was speaking about his climate investments. And then he went on to say that the country still needs oil and gas for at least the next decade or so. And at that point, you did see a strong applause from Republicans. Of course, they have been big advocates for bringing back domestic production of oil or trying to help revive that industry and call for more investments there. Now, a note on China, a quick note. I was actually quite surprised personally that he didn't talk about China a bit more, considering how bipartisan that issue is and considering the sense of unity that the president was trying to make and is trying to make. He briefly mentioned that the U.S. shouldn't see China in the lens of conflict, but rather competition. And then he just defended his actions toward that Chinese spy balloon over the past week. And then one last note on his 2024 run. One quick thing that I did notice is that he did say when he was speaking about his investments in infrastructure that we're just getting started. So those are some of the key points that I picked up, much like you, Kelly, and Steve.
Melina on the scene, thank you so much.
All right, let's bring back our panel right now. Timothy Allen Simon joining us, as well as Paris Denard. Gentlemen, thank you for staying with us throughout this occasion with the President of the United States giving his second State of the Union address. And I'd like to ask you both, how effective was the President in presenting his successes to the American people? Timothy, starting with you.
It looks like we're having a sound issue here with Timothy. Paris, if you're with us.
Sorry, that was my mute button.
All right, Timothy, go ahead. You're unmuted now. Please talk away.
I think the speech was a little long, but the president did come out with considerable energy and really began engaging both sides of the aisle by referencing what we have accomplished together. In contrast to our former president, who was I, he was more we. And I think that is, to take it from the Three Little Pigs, I think that is a more effective way of drawing the attention, not only of the Congress and the various branches, but of the people. I thought that he had an effective message there.
Paris, I'd just like to toss it over to you to get your reaction to the speech. Do you think that the Democratic base is feeling good about the president's accomplishments as we make our way into the 2024 election cycle?
Well, I think it's surprising that everyone is talking about President Biden's energy. It's a shame when in one speech he seems to be awake and alert and energetic, and everyone has to comment about it because that's not the norm. The norm for Joe Biden as president is not someone who is youthful and energetic and exciting. And so that is something that he's going to have to think about and work on if he's going to, in fact, run for president in 2024. The other point is whether or not the base is satisfied. Look, the Democrat base is fractured. You have the progressives. You saw Representative Al Green raising up his cane throughout the speech, but you have others that are not aligned with everything that the president does because they want him to go further. They want him to be more aggressive. They want him to be more progressive. And so he's going to have to work with that and deal with that, as he has people like Senator Sinema and others, Senator Joe Manchin, West Virginia, who are more on the side of trying to work and be in the middle and be more independent minded. So he has his work cut out for him. Last point I would say is this. Speaker McCarthy specifically asked and requested of the president not to directly engage with Republican members in his caucus by name. He didn't do it by name, but he talked about them in general and referred to them. That was in poor form because Speaker McCarthy knew that was not going to go over well. And if you want to talk about unity and talk about working in a bipartisan manner, don't egg them on and poke at them in that negative way. So that was something that he probably could have avoided, hence a lot of the heckling that he did receive because of the information that he was given as well.
Paris Denard talking to us about his insights and perspective on what the president discussed in tonight's State of the Union address. Timothy, I want to get back to you right now. As you see this president talking to the American people, the question is now going to be asked, what happens next? What must the Biden administration do, along with Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans and the Democrats? What must they do to keep America moving forward? And might I add, to defend and protect democracy, because you noted that when he talked about can all of us stand up and applaud the senior citizens of this nation. So you have this intergenerational outreach that the president has to do, that members of the Congress have to do. What do you think lies ahead?
Well, one, the president was very shrewd in putting Medicare and Social Security on the table, even drawing the ire of the Republicans. And I have to disagree with Paris for blaming the president for the heckling. I think any person can conduct themselves in a civilized fashion in a setting of this sort. but I think he did put forth that he will defend Medicare, he will defend Social Security. And as I understand, Speaker McCarthy has said similar. So I do think that's something that's going to have to be more transparency and clarified in terms of where we're going on the debt ceiling and what will be the proposal that's accepted. Clearly, China, I think the president is going to have to support a full investigation of this aircraft. I refuse to just call it a balloon, but this aircraft that's been collecting data. And how long has this been going on? You can't just say because we shot one down. This appears to be a intelligence gathering device of the CCP, and I think he should not pull any punches. I do think he has to look at China as an adversary. I don't see any other way under the circumstances of recent, and I think he's going to have to establish that, regardless of the fact that it may cause a degree of weakening within his own party.
Paris, I have to ask you, to Timothy's point, it did strike me that the president did not emphasize the threat of China, anything really much about China, given the fact that we've seen what we've went through over the past week or so. It really struck me as well that he teed up COVID and the toll that COVID has taken on the U.S. and on the American people without mentioning the origins and how China allowed it to spread throughout the world while shutting down domestically. Do you think that this was a missed opportunity for him?
It certainly was a missed opportunity. This has been one of the strongest critiques from a foreign policy standpoint against President Biden, in the sense that he's been weak on China. Weak when it comes to holding them accountable for COVID, for the human rights abuses, which a lot of people in that humanitarian space care a lot about, and also when it comes to this, as Timothy calls this large aircraft, this balloon that was flying over. It makes him seem that he is weak and not being strong and tough on China and standing up, not even calling them a competitor, kind of softening how he talks about them. Look, the American people have seen for quite a while the ramifications of being weak on China and their impact and their stronghold on the American economy, and it's not good. And so this is something that he should have been stronger on. And to Timothy's other point about civility, I was glad that the Speaker of the House showed civility and didn't rip up the speech like Speaker Pelosi did. That was something that was important to show that he can conduct himself as Speaker. And actually, when the members of his caucus were heckling, you saw him repeatedly tell them, quiet down, shh, don't do that, out of respect to the office. That was something that was good for Speaker McCarthy to do. And the last point is this. President Biden missed the opportunity when it came to talking about Social Security. Speaker McCarthy and the Republican caucus had came out earlier and said Social Security was off the table, where they weren't going to try to change it at all. Why he continued to talk about it in the State of the Union as if Republicans wanted to, he got fact-checked in live time. They fact-checked him and said they're not going to do it. So that's the type of things that you have to really look at. The Republicans said they weren't going to take action against Social Security. President Biden still put it in the speech, and he got fact-checked live on television by the Republicans.
All right, Paris pointing that out. And while we're talking, gentlemen, if we can show some live pictures right now, the president, he's still in the House chamber. If our producer can pull that up, I just wanted to show that the president, which is customary, actually takes time out to talk to members of Congress as he's leaving. But while we're addressing that issue, there he is right there, the president still talking. One of the things he talked about, as we see him talking to one of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, he did call attention to the family of Tyree Nichols, the young man who was killed in Memphis. We do know that 8 police officers have been charged on that, and 8 more police officers is forthcoming that they will be charged as well in his death. There's a problem right there with policing in America. I want to ask both of you, as African American men, what your take is on the president discussing this issue tonight and also addressing the possibility of reintroducing or having the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed in some sort of way. Timothy, what's your take on this?
And I'll do my best, Kelly. It was a little difficult to hear you because of the noise from the chamber. But this is a tragic and fascinating scenario that we face in reference to the Tyree Nichols tragic, and I can call it nothing else but murder. But I think what we will see, and Ben Crump referenced this, these were primarily black officers. And as black men, I think we know that the justice will probably be much swifter on the black officers than we've experienced in other cases involving excessive force or police misconduct around the country. I think the same thing occurred in Baltimore. And what it says is that the issue of the targeted attacks on African American males, it crosses racial lines. And I think Republicans who do not want to see government all in our business, all in our households, all in our families, they should take a stand against excessive police force, because in many communities they're really occupied by the police departments rather than the police actually serving the community. I think this is a great area that Republicans can attract more support from a more diverse audience that wants to see, when we're talking about less government, that includes police enforcement as well.
Paris, we'll just give you an opportunity to respond to Timothy's points.
Look, I think that we could have had police reform. First of all, let me just say it is a tragic turn of events that happened in Memphis for the family of Tyree Nichols to see their son and their family member murdered like that. It's unacceptable, should not have happened. Case closed. But as it relates to what the Congress can do, what we saw is that there has been an inability for the Democrats especially to be willing to compromise on certain issues to get something across the finish line, especially when it comes to police reform. We know that Senator Scott led on the effort for his Justice Act, which Dick Durbin called a token piece of legislation. And we know that Senator Cory Booker walked away from the negotiating table, refusing to go forward when Senator Scott wanted to continue. There's things that they can take out and put in to get the job done. You won't get 100% of what you want. You might have to take out some things to get it across the finish line. That's what happens in policy. That's what happens in politics. You get what you can to get it across the finish line, rather being at the point where we are today and having nothing significant that people really wanted to see happen. So this is another opportunity. Republicans don't have a problem when it comes to police reform. They passed it. They've done things when it comes to being right on crime, those organizations. This is a unifying point, as long as the Democrats are willing to meet in the middle and get something done, and they may have to compromise to do it.
Both of you sharing insights on that and your perspective on that. On another issue, we heard the president talk tonight about fentanyl. Such a tragic set of circumstances, as we've seen fentanyl do so much damage to the American people. Even citing tonight the president talking about one of the guests and a 20-year-old daughter of one of the guests succumbing to fentanyl. I recall doing, Stephen, an opioid addiction series many years ago, and just how devastating this has been and how long it's been. And I know we're repeating this, but the Republican response was shut down the borders. It's important to bring this up because as we move forward and we strive to protect our young people in America as well as older people, the president was pointing out it's not just fentanyl, it's also social media, it's also the big tech companies. How does the Congress and the president bring all this together? We are standing by waiting for Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders to deliver the Republican address. So real quickly, Timothy, how do we address all of the above?
I think with the truth, our mayor, London Breed, African-American woman, cited the Honduran community for being responsible for much of the fentanyl that's coming into San Francisco, devastating our city. She was attacked. She was attacked for being racially insensitive to the Latinx. Even though if you say Crips or Bloods, immediately African-American comes into your imaginary vision. So I think the truth in the fact that drugs are being trafficked across our border, and they are being trafficked by many nationalities, but primarily those coming from south of the border, and China has a hand in that as well. And I think there needs to be just a pure, transparent, discussion on how do we effectively have a war on drugs without also creating another wave of mass incarceration. There's a lot of mental health issues tied in that.
And Timothy and Paris, if you could just stand by for a moment. We're going to go back to the Capitol where we have Florida Congresswoman Kat Cammack set to join us. Congresswoman, are you there?
Yep, I can hear you great.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for taking some time. If you could, obviously you just sat through the speech. What are your initial thoughts on President Biden's State of the Union?
Well, I got to tell you, it was a little disorienting, first from the yelling and then the whispering. It was a little weird from that standpoint, but more importantly, it seemed like there were two State of the Unions. It seemed like President Biden couldn't decide whether or not he wanted to send a message of unity or attack Republicans, because he seemed to talk about both in the same breath. He conveniently forgot about Chinese spy balloons that dominated the news cycle for the last week, and of course left out the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. It was really a speech that was divorced from reality in so many ways, and pretty concerning that in some of the most dire times that we've seen in the regulatory state that is really forcing American families to make tough decisions, historic 40-year highs for inflation, on top of all the other challenges that we have going on, he seems still content on a highly partisan agenda that is more about political wins than getting things done for the American people. So disheartening, but at the same time, it just shows us that Republicans, we've got a lot of work to do.
Congresswoman, does it also show us that there's a lot of, not just a lot of work to do on behalf of the Republicans, but that Democrats must do the work as well? How do we get to a place called unity and common ground for the common good of the American people to do what this president has talked about, heal the soul of America? How do you see that? How do we personally get involved in healing the soul of America, despite what we hear and see from this president, but what we must do in Congress?
You know, I think it starts with doing the opposite of what President Biden did tonight. You can't talk about unity in one breath and then attack Republicans in the next. That is exactly where the trust starts breaking down. Furthermore, I feel that he was incredibly disingenuous in talking about issues that impact all Americans regardless of party affiliation, especially in talking about the border and fentanyl poisonings. In one breath he says we need to pass only his bill, only he can fix the border, but then disregards the fact that Republicans have been calling for security at the border for years. We have talked about the fact that the source of this fentanyl that is poisoning and killing 300 Americans a day is coming from China and subsequently being processed and then trafficked through Mexico into the United States. These are all facts that he conveniently ignores. On the front of the economy, he talks about only a made in America, but in the next breath, he's talking about taking on corporations and conveniently omitting the fact that he is regulating American industry out of business. So he really can't have it both ways. We've got to get back to that place of unity, but that starts with putting your money where your mouth is. And in this case, he has done anything but.
Congresswoman Kat Cammack, thank you so much for taking some time to join us. And right now we are going to bring you Arkansas Governor Sarah Sanders Huckabee's rebuttal to the State of the Union.
Ever known, because we're the freest country the world has ever known, with a people who are strong and resilient. 5 months ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was a hard time for our family, particularly our kids, Scarlett, Huck, and George. But we kept our faith and persevered. Thanks to exceptional doctors here in Arkansas, a successful surgery, and the grace of God, I am cancer-free. Through it all, I couldn't help but think about my mom. She was 20 years old and in her first year of marriage when she was diagnosed with spinal cancer. The doctors told her she might not live, and if she did live, they said she'd never walk again. And if she did walk, she'd definitely never have children. The daughter she was told she'd never have was just sworn in as the new governor of Arkansas and is speaking to you tonight. Adversity and fear of the unknown can paralyze us, but faith propels us to charge boldly ahead. We can't stand still in the face of great challenges. You and I were put on this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country, and at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration has been completely hijacked by the radical left. The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy. It's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. Upon taking office just a few weeks ago, I signed executive orders to ban CRT, racism, and indoctrination in our schools, eliminate the use of derogatory term Latinx in our government, repealed COVID orders, and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. Americans want common sense from their leaders, but in Washington, the Biden administration is doubling down on crazy. President Biden inherited the fastest economic recovery on record, the most secure border in history, cheap, abundant, homegrown energy, fast rising wages, a rebuilt military, and a world that was stable and at peace. But over the last 2 years, Democrats destroyed it all. Despite Democrats' trillions in reckless spending and mountains of debt, we now have the worst border crisis in American history. As a mom, my heart breaks for every parent who has lost a son or daughter to addiction. 100,000 Americans a year are now killed from drug overdoses, largely from fentanyl pouring across our southern border. Yet the Biden administration refuses to secure the border and save American lives. And after years of Democrat attacks on law enforcement and calls to defund the police, violent criminals roam free, while law-abiding families live in fear. Beyond our border, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from North Korea to Iran, President Biden's weakness puts our nation and the world at risk. And the president's refusal to stand up to China, our most formidable adversary, is dangerous and unacceptable. President Biden is unwilling to defend our border, defend our skies, and defend our people. He is simply unfit to serve as commander-in-chief. And while you reap the consequences of their failures, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. But we are under attack in a left-wing culture war we didn't start and never wanted to fight. Every day we are told we must partake in their rituals, salute their flags, and worship their false idols, all while big government colludes with big tech to strip away the most American thing there is, your freedom of speech. That's not normal. It's crazy, and it's wrong. Make no mistake, Republicans will not surrender this fight. We will lead with courage and do what's right, not what's politically correct or convenient. Republicans believe in an America where strong families thrive in safe communities, where jobs are abundant and paychecks are rising, where the freedom our veterans shed their blood to defend is the birthright of every man, woman, and child. These are the principles Republican governors are fighting for, and in Washington, under the leadership of Senate Republicans and Speaker Kevin McCarthy, we will hold the Biden administration accountable. Down the street from where I sit is my alma mater, Little Rock Central High. As a student there, I will never forget watching my dad, Governor Mike Huckabee, and President Bill Clinton hold the doors open to the Little Rock Nine. Doors that 40 years earlier had been closed to them because they were Black. Today, those children once barred from the schoolhouse are now heroes memorialized in bronze at our State House. I'm proud of the progress our country has made, and I believe giving every child access to a quality education, regardless of their race or income, is the civil rights issue of our day. Tomorrow, I will unveil an education package that will be the most far-reaching, bold, conservative education reform in the country. My plan empowers parents with real choices, improves literacy and career readiness, and helps put a good teacher in every classroom by increasing their starting salary from one of the lowest to one of the highest in the nation. Here in Arkansas and across America, Republicans are working to end the policy of trapping kids in failing schools and sentencing them to a lifetime of poverty. We will educate, not indoctrinate our kids, and put students on a path to success. It's time for a new generation to lead. This is our moment. This is our opportunity. A new generation born in the waning decades of the last century, shaped by economic booms and stock market busts, forged by the triumph of the Cold War and the tragedy of 9/11. A generation brimming with passion and new ideas to solve age-old problems. A generation moored to our deepest values and oldest traditions, yet unafraid to challenge the present order and find a better way forward. If we seize this moment together, America can once again be the land of the free and the home of the brave. During my 2.5 years at the White House, I traveled on every foreign trip with the president. A trip I will never forget was on December 25th of 2018. My husband Brian and I had just cleaned up wrapping paper that was shoved into every corner of our house, thanks to our 3 kids. When I had to walk out on my own family's Christmas, unable to tell them where I was going that night, because the place I'd be traveling was so dangerous, they didn't want anybody to know that the president was going to be on the ground, even for a few hours. We boarded Air Force One in complete and total darkness. There were no lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. Our phones and computers shut down and turned in. We were going completely off the grid. Nearly 12 hours later, in the pitch black of night, we landed in the war-torn part of Western Iraq. It was again a similar scene. No lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. The only thing you could see was coming from about a mile away. In a dining hall were hundreds of troops who were in the fight against ISIS, had gathered expecting to celebrate Christmas with senior military leadership from around the region. They had absolutely no idea that the president and first lady were about to walk into that room. And when they did, it was a sight and a scene and a sound I hope I never forget. The room erupted. Men and women from every race, religion, and region, every political party, every demographic you can imagine, started chanting in perfect unison over and over and over again, USA, USA, USA. It was an absolutely perfect picture of what makes our country great. One of the young soldiers yelled from the back, "Mr. President, I re-enlisted in the military because of you." And the president said, "And son, I'm here because of you." Shortly after that young soldier came.
And we're listening to the response from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders as she is delivering the Republican response. We are approaching 11 p.m. Eastern Time. Pardon our interruption. We'll be wrapping up our live conference here on here on TV. But please tune in to NTD's YouTube channel as we continue. That's at ntd.com or the YouTube channel, where we'll continue our coverage and continue to listen to Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. From all of us here at NTD, good night and God bless America.
And now we continue our coverage of President Biden's State of the Union speech, where we have Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's just delivered the Republican response to the president's speech. Joining us next to recap.
Actually, the governor is still addressing the audience, so we continue to listen to her speech from the Arkansas Mansion as she talks about a new generation moving forward as she delivers her Republican response.
Not to be caretakers of the status quo, but to be change makers for the American people. We know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future in his hands. And with God as our witness, we will show the world that America is still the place where freedom reigns and liberty will never die. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
And there you have it, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders giving the rebuttal. Joining us next to recap the president's speech, we're happy to have Chair of the House Republican Policy Committee, Congressman Gary Palmer. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Congressman, you were there in person for the speech. Just right off the top, what struck you most?
How divisive the speech was. It was almost bullying. I've heard a number of State of the Union speeches, and I've never heard one quite like that. For a president to come out and talk about unity and bringing the country together, and then attack Republicans with, frankly, stuff that's just not true, was very disappointing.
Congressman, the president touted his economic policy. What did you make of what he said, and specifically when it comes to inflation, and what direction do you see the economy heading in the coming months?
Well, in regard to the president's analysis of the economy, it was very misleading. He's talking about that gas prices are lower now than they were from their high point, but they're still a good bit higher, over $1 a gallon higher than they were when he took office. He talks about the unemployment rate being the lowest that it's been in decades, maybe the lowest ever recorded. But what he doesn't tell the American people is the Bureau of Labor Statistics stopped counting people who are not looking for work. And we literally are borrowing money, mortgaging the future, our own future, our kids' future, our grandkids' future, to pay people not to work. They're not counted. We have one of the lowest labor participation rates that we've seen in decades. So when he tells you that the unemployment rate is low, it's because so many people are no longer looking for work and they're not even counted. So, like I say, the president misrepresented so many things about the condition of the country that it was very disappointing to hear that.
Congressman, I mean, to your point, the president proudly said that inflation is coming down and touted lower gas prices. You do sit on the Energy and Commerce Committee. What do you make of those specific comments?
Well, he's talking about gas at the pump. It's still, as I just said, probably $1 a gallon higher than it was when he took office. But if you look at household energy costs, particularly in the colder states around the country where they use heating oil, it hit at one point almost double what it had been before he took office. There are a lot of people struggling. There's 20 million American households that are behind on their household utility bills. There are households in certain parts of the country where they're making decisions about how much they can spend on their groceries, how much they can spend on their medicine, and still keep their homes adequately warm. I think the president, again, misrepresented where we are in this country, particularly for a lot of people that are really having a hard time making ends meet.
Congressman Palmer, on the foreign policy front, one thing that, reactions coming in that struck some folks is the fact that, seeing what we saw with the Chinese Communist Party invading American airspace with their spy balloon over the past week, we thought that we might hear a little bit more on the CCP and the threat that they pose. Were you surprised that we didn't?
Not really. I don't think the president's going to do anything that's provocative in regard to China. He talks big about trade and competition, but I don't see this president really standing up to China unless he just has no other alternative. Some of the things that he talked about, it's interesting that he wants to shut down fossil fuel, and he said that we're going to need oil and gas for another decade. And then the guy is calling on oil and gas companies to invest in infrastructure here for just another decade. That's unbelievably dumb. Nobody's going to make investments, those type investments in that type infrastructure, if they're going to be shut down in 10 years. The other thing is this idea that we're going to be 100% renewable is a pipe dream. I work for 2 international engineering companies. I have a pretty good idea of what it takes to provide the energy that the country's going to need. He literally would take us off of natural gas, make us reliant on China for the parts that we need to build wind turbines or solar panels. In other words, we have all of the fossil fuel resources that we could possibly need. We'll never run out of oil and natural gas. But he wants to shut all of that down and make us totally reliant, almost totally reliant on China to power our economy. That is extremely dangerous, and I consider that a national security issue.
Congressman Gary Palmer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Indeed, it's good to have Congressman Gary Palmer joining us this hour. I want to get to the panel to bring them back in. Let's go back to the panel, Timothy Allen Simon and Paris Denard. Gentlemen, it has been quite a night. We've heard from various congressmen. We've heard from both of you as it pertains to what the president had to say tonight. We also heard from newly elected Governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, delivering her Republican address to the nation. I want to do a recap of what she said. She went on to state that Republicans believe in an America where strong families thrive in safe communities, where jobs are abundant and paychecks are rising. She also talked about the freedom. She alluded to, well, not alluded to, but she directly talked about her dad, who was a governor, Mike Huckabee, as well as President Bill Clinton, talking about opening up the doors to the Little Rock School and seeing black children, white children, all God's children being able to go into that school based on the history of what happened there during segregation and during desegregation. But she also waxed not just poetically, but scripturally. I want to ask you, starting with you, Paris, your response to the Republican response as given by Governor Huckabee, who was unafraid to talk about her faith in God and in America and in the American people.
Well, that's who Sarah Sanders is. Her faith is just like her father's faith, very much a part of their public persona and private life. I do say that this was less of a GOP response and more of a Sarah Huckabee Sanders bio to introduce her to the nation. I think people can use the GOP response in several ways of making it about a direct response to what the president says, or taking the opportunity to highlight themselves and introduce them to the American people. And I think that's more so what she chose to do. I think she'll raise a lot of money off of that response. I think that a lot of people will take more note of what she's going to do because she's only been in office for a few short weeks now, since January. And so I think that this was her opportunity to say to the American people, take a look at what I'm going to do here in Arkansas. And I think a lot of people will do that.
And Timothy, I'd just like to ask you, there was a point of contention in the room tonight when President Biden spoke about fentanyl. You got a response from some Republican lawmakers to close the border. In the governor of Arkansas's rebuttal speech, she did highlight the issue at the southern border. How do you see this playing out now in coming months? Timothy, I believe you're mute.
Timothy, you might be muted there. If you unmute
There I
yourself.
go again. There I go again with the mute button. I'm sorry. It's going to be a battleground issue in 2024. The relationship between the southern border and drugs, which is nothing new, by the way. This has been a challenge that this country has had, not only the importation of drugs, but our consumption of those drugs as a country. And it is a mental health issue. I think it's not necessarily a criminal justice issue, but we do have to get our arms around it. I agree with Paris that, she spoke about a new generation of Republican leadership while at the same time lamenting on former President Trump. I think in her own way, she's trying to position herself for future national office, not just what she's going to do in Arkansas. There's already been talk of her possibly being a vice presidential running mate. So it was clear to me that she was giving a message, or took the opportunity to give the message of her leadership. And but one thing that rang interesting to me, and I don't want to make it take up too much time, when President Biden talked about what really was America first and American manufacturing and American, goods required from America. When President Trump made those same kind of remarks, the media referred to it as isolationism, as nationalism, as withdrawing from the global theater. Well, it's just interesting to me we talk about as a free thinker, how certain people can be characterized a certain way for saying almost the exact same thing.
And Paris, any response to that?
I mean, look, he's right. It's fascinating, but that's how politics goes. That's how the media is. And it just goes to show that a lot of times people are less concerned about really getting things done and just really dividing the nation. When you take out the things that if you take out President Trump or the word Republican and look at the things that they were able to accomplish under his presidency, a lot of people would say that their lives were better, that the policies were working for them, especially from an economic standpoint. But because it's Donald J. Trump or because it was Republican, they won't give him the credit. And I think you just have to give credit to where credit is due and do things that will help move the country forward. The problem with politics is that politics gets in the way of good policy, because you won't give the good policy a chance, because that would mean a win for your opponent or a win for McCarthy. So we don't want to give McCarthy a win, so we won't do that what the Republican Congress wants to do. If you want to bring this country together and you want to really make people feel better than they do with the 60 some odd percent saying the economy is bad, you've got to find the compromise and stop demonizing the other party or the other person and give credit where credit is due. And the border is a prime example. There's no question. The fentanyl issue is directly linked to the border. You need to have a strong border policy, enforcement of the border, so that we can keep the southern states and the entire country safe. Until we do that, it's all lip service. Donald Trump can talk about it and it's wrong, but I promise you, if Joe Biden talked about really having a strong border and cited the humanitarian aspects of it, he would be celebrated like they clapped tonight when he talked about the link between the border and the drugs, referring to the parent. It's politics.
Gentlemen, we want to thank you both. Paris Denard, Timothy Allen Simon, giving keen insights and perspective on President Joe Biden this February 7th, 2023, the State of the Union, the president delivering his second State of the Union since being in office. You know, Paris was saying something about we've got to stop demonizing each other. And getting back to what Governor Huckabee talked about, it's really come to a place now where Americans have to exercise faith and perseverance to develop the character, and I might add the godly character, so that we do stop demonizing each other. There is a scripture that says in Isaiah, in order to become restorers of the streets of dwelling, in order to restore our nation, we have to stop pointing fingers at each other and maliciously wounding each other, but set the oppression free and help people be restored to a better way of living. So this president, this Congress, these governors that operate in the leadership in America, as well as local municipality leaders and state leaders, they all have to come together to stop demonizing each other and apply that faith and perseverance to move our nation forward.
Well said, Kelly, and indeed you made the point that Sarah Huckabee Sanders made about bringing faith into our lives, and that's a very important thing that you did not hear much from on the other side, but hopefully we'll hear more of it in the future.
It's time for it, my friend. We have to stand together or fall and perish as fools. I would just like to thank you for letting me be part of this tonight on NTD. It's been a pleasure.
It's been an honor, and thanks to all of our viewers tuning in from around the world. I'm Steve Lance with my co-host Kelly Wright. So long, everybody, and good night.